It all started on a quiet Saturday afternoon. I was at home, relaxing, when I got a call from my daughter, Mia. I could tell by the tone of her voice that something wasn't right. She was upset, but trying to keep it together. "Dad," she said, "I need you to come down to the community security office right now. There's been an incident." I immediately jumped in my car, not knowing what I was about to walk into. Mia had been living in a nice suburban neighborhood for a couple of years, and everything had been calm, too calm, in fact. The HOA, Homeowners Association, was usually pretty strict, but they weren't the type to cause trouble unless someone was breaking the rules. But something was different this time. When I arrived, I could see Mia standing outside the security office looking shaken. A tall, burly security guard stood nearby, his arms crossed. I walked up to her, concerned. "What happened?" I asked. Mia looked at me, her expression a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "They pulled a gun on me," she said, her voice trembling. I froze for a moment, unable to process what she was saying. "Why?" I asked, confused. She took a deep breath. Apparently, I was parked in the wrong spot. Somehow I didn't notice the sign that said "No parking here," even though it was barely visible. But when I went to move my car, the security guard stopped me. I explained who I was, but he wasn't having any of it. He got aggressive, and before I knew it, he was pulling a gun on me. My heart sank. Mia was no ordinary woman. She was an FBI tactical commander, trained to handle high-stress situations, and yet this guy was threatening her with a weapon? How could anyone be so reckless? Mia continued, her voice steadier now, but still showing traces of shock. I didn't want to escalate things, so I calmly explained that I was a law enforcement officer. I told him that I could take care of the situation, but he didn't want to listen. He just kept yelling and told me to stay in my car. I wasn't sure what to do next, so I stayed calm and kept my hands visible, trying not to provoke him further. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The security guard, clearly overstepping his role, had drawn a weapon on a trained FBI officer over something as trivial as a parking spot? How could this have escalated so quickly? Mia's voice grew firmer as she recounted the details. I told him again that I was FBI, and he didn't seem to care. Instead of de-escalating, he just pulled his gun out and pointed it at me. I've been in life-threatening situations before, but this was different. I was scared, not for myself, but for what might happen next. I was in disbelief. How had this situation gotten so out of hand? I had raised Mia to handle herself in any situation, but to hear that someone had threatened her, even in a small community like this, was heartbreaking. The most terrifying part wasn't just the gun. It was the fact that this security guard had no idea who he was dealing with. If Mia had acted differently or had been in a different state of mind, things could have gone south quickly. But Mia was trained. She knew how to stay calm, how to assess a situation without letting emotions take over. And that's exactly what she did. "Did you call anyone?" I asked, my voice tense with worry. "Yes," Mia replied. "I called my supervisor to get assistance, but I didn't want to escalate it further. I knew if I did anything rash, the situation would spiral out of control." I kept hoping he would realize that I wasn't the enemy. As we stood outside the security office, I could feel the tension between Mia and the guard. He seemed frustrated, but he didn't say much. Finally, the supervisor of the security office arrived. His demeanor was calm and composed, but it was clear he was already aware of the situation. The supervisor walked up to Mia and addressed the guard. "What happened here?" he asked, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The security guard muttered something about how Mia had been disrespectful and refused to comply. But Mia didn't flinch. She calmly explained her side of the story, detailing how the guard had become hostile and escalated the situation unnecessarily. The supervisor listened carefully, and after a few tense moments he nodded. "We'll be investigating the situation. You made it clear that you were simply trying to handle the situation calmly and professionally." Mia and I exchanged glances, and though we were still shaken by the incident, I was relieved to see that the supervisor seemed to take the matter seriously. The guard had clearly overstepped, and I was confident that they would deal with it appropriately. "Thank you for handling this calmly," the supervisor said to Mia, his tone now more apologetic. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." I looked at Mia, proud of how she had handled the situation. I had no doubt that she could have easily disarmed the guard or taken control of the situation, but she didn't need to. She had demonstrated true strength by keeping her cool in a moment that could have easily spiraled into chaos. As we left the office, I couldn't help but reflect on the experience. It was a reminder of how easy things could escalate when people overstepped their boundaries. But it was also a reminder of Mia's incredible composure and the strength she carried with her. Mia was trained for moments like this, trained to stay calm under pressure, to make decisions when lives were on the line. But no one, not even the most trained agents, should ever have to face such an unnecessary confrontation. I took a moment to process everything before turning to the security guard. "You pulled a gun on my daughter for a parking violation?" I demanded. My voice was steady, but the weight of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't understand how this could have escalated so quickly. The guard's face didn't show any sign of regret or hesitation. He simply shrugged. She was being combative. I had to protect myself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mia wasn't combative by nature. She was calm, collected, and skilled in de-escalating tense situations. The idea that she'd suddenly become a threat was absurd. I looked at her, trying to make sense of the story she had just shared with me. She was trained to handle high-stakes situations and had the composure of someone who was used to dealing with life-and-death moments. The fact that this guard had pulled a weapon on her over something as trivial as a parking spot made my blood boil. Before I could say anything else, Mia stepped in. "Dad, calm down," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Let me handle this." With that, Mia walked toward the security guard. She didn't hesitate. She stood tall and composed, her presence shifting from defensive to authoritative. As an FBI tactical commander, Mia had gone through countless training exercises that focused on handling high-stress scenarios, disarming suspects, controlling hostile environments, and protecting herself and others under extreme pressure. But today, she wasn't in her usual tactical gear or carrying a weapon. She was just a civilian in a neighborhood, trying to enjoy her day off. Her posture was a reflection of her years of training. She took a deep breath. Her shoulders relaxed, but her movements deliberate. This wasn't the first time she had been in an intense situation, but what made it different was that this time, she wasn't facing a criminal or an armed suspect. She was facing a man who, despite his job, clearly had no understanding of his authority or how to manage an escalating situation. Mia knew how to read people, and she could see that the guard was on edge, his hand still gripping the weapon. "Listen," Mia began, her voice steady and controlled. "I understand that you have a job to do, but pulling a weapon on someone over a parking ticket is far beyond what's necessary. I'm not going to resist or make things worse, but I'm going to ask you to lower the gun and step away from me." The security guard hesitated. He clearly wasn't used to anyone talking to him like this. Most residents just accepted the HOA's rules without question, not realizing that the security staff often overstepped their boundaries. They were quick to resort to threats and intimidation, using their power to control the neighborhood. But Mia wasn't just anyone. She was trained in handling people in these situations, and she wasn't about to let this man think that his aggressive behavior would go unchecked. Mia's tone was calm, but her presence commanded respect. The guard seemed to falter for a moment, clearly taken aback by her composure and authority. He wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly not by someone who seemed so calm in the face of what should have been a dangerous situation. At first, the guard didn't move, his hand still gripping the gun. His posture was tense, and his eyes narrowed in a mixture of anger and confusion. He was used to authority, not the kind of defiance that Mia was showing. She wasn't trying to antagonize him, but she wasn't going to let him bully her either. She understood the power dynamics at play here. He was used to people caving to intimidation, but Mia was not intimidated. "You're not in a position to escalate things further," Mia continued, her voice unwavering. "You need to calm down and call your supervisor." It was at that moment that the security guard seemed to falter. I could see his grip on the weapon loosen just a little, and his expression changed from one of aggression to one of confusion. "You think you can just talk me down like that?" he grumbled, clearly rattled by her unflinching demeanor. "I'm not talking you down," Mia replied, her voice still calm but now carrying a subtle edge. "I'm giving you a chance to de-escalate before it gets worse." There was a pause, a moment of tension that hung in the air. The guard's eyes flickered between Mia and the gun in his hand, and I could tell he was struggling internally. He wasn't used to someone like Mia, someone who not only had the training to handle high-pressure situations, but also the confidence to take control without resorting to aggression or violence. Mia wasn't threatening him, but she was asserting herself in a way that left no room for doubt. She wasn't afraid, and she wasn't going to back down. She was trying to give him an out, a way to avoid making a disastrous decision. She was essentially offering him a chance to regain control of the situation, but on her terms. The guard's hand shook slightly as he lowered the weapon, still clearly on edge. He took a step back, and for the first time, his posture softened. He had no idea who Mia was when this whole confrontation started, but now, as he stood there, he realized that he had misjudged the situation completely. Mia didn't take her eyes off him, and for a long moment the only sound was the rush of air between us. Finally, the guard seemed to calm down, his aggressive posture giving way to a more neutral stance. "You're all right," the guard muttered, still reluctant to fully admit his mistake. I shouldn't have done that." Mia nodded. "Exactly. Now, please call your supervisor. Let's make sure this doesn't go any further." I watched as the guard reluctantly pulled out his radio to call for backup. Mia had handled the situation with an extraordinary level of composure, and I couldn't have been prouder. She had not only de-escalated a potentially dangerous confrontation, but she had done it in a way that left the security guard with no choice but to admit his error. The guard finally lowered his weapon, though he clearly wasn't happy about it. His hand still trembled slightly, his eyes darting nervously around the area. He wasn't used to being confronted, let alone confronted with the calm confidence that Mia had just demonstrated. His aggressive stance shifted to one of uncertainty as he slowly put the gun back in its holster, though it was obvious that he was still struggling with the embarrassment of the situation. A few moments later, the sound of a car pulling up broke the tension. The supervisor had arrived, an older man with a calm demeanor, wearing a crisp uniform and a badge that gave off an air of authority. He immediately assessed the scene, scanning the area quickly before walking over to Mia. "What's going on here?" he asked the guard, his tone even but firm. He didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his presence made it clear that this was not a small matter. The security guard, now visibly shaken, quickly explained his side of the story, telling the supervisor that Mia had been combative and that he felt threatened when she didn't immediately comply with his orders. His words were rushed, almost defensive, as though he needed to justify his actions. But Mia wasn't having it. She stood there, arms relaxed by her sides, not moving an inch. Her voice was still steady, but there was a firmness in it that left no room for argument. She calmly explained the situation from her perspective, pointing out that she had been simply parking her car in what she assumed was a legal space, and that it was a misunderstanding. She made it clear that the security guard had overreacted when he pulled his weapon, escalating the situation unnecessarily. The supervisor listened carefully, his eyes never leaving Mia as she spoke. When she finished, he turned his attention to the guard. "Is that how it happened?" he asked, his voice now carrying an authoritative edge. The guard shifted uncomfortably, his face turning red. "Well, I thought she was trying to avoid the rules, and she wasn't cooperating," he stammered, though his voice lacked the confidence it had earlier. The supervisor didn't seem convinced. He took a step closer to the guard and looked him in the eyes. "This could have been handled differently," he said, his tone calm but stern. "If you felt threatened, there are procedures to follow. But pulling a weapon on a resident over a parking dispute is far beyond what's acceptable." The supervisor turned to me, as if noticing my concerned expression for the first time. He nodded as he spoke. "We take these kinds of things seriously," he said, his voice softening slightly. "I can see there was a misunderstanding, and I apologize for what happened. This isn't how we want our residents to feel when dealing with security." He turned back to the guard. "We will be conducting an investigation into your actions. For now, I'll make sure this kind of incident doesn't happen again." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I was relieved that the situation was de-escalating, but I also couldn't help but feel frustrated. This entire thing could have turned out so differently if Mia hadn't been able to keep her cool. The fact that the guard had no idea who Mia really was made the situation all the more dangerous. If Mia hadn't been trained to handle these types of high-pressure scenarios, things could have escalated to a level none of us wanted to imagine. Mia had kept everything under control, and it was clear that the supervisor recognized her professionalism. "Thank you for handling this calmly," the supervisor said to Mia, his tone sincere. "I can tell you're not just another person on the street. You've got the right skills to deal with this kind of thing, and I'm grateful it didn't turn out worse." Mia nodded slightly, though I could tell she was still processing what had just happened. As we walked away from the scene, I could feel my adrenaline start to fade, the tension in my shoulders slowly dissipating. I turned to Mia and said, "You were incredible back there." She gave a small, tired smile and shrugged. "It's just part of the job," she said, though I could see that the experience had affected her. "I've been in worse situations, but this one caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it to escalate like that over something so minor." "I know," I replied, "but I'm just glad you kept your cool. You turned what could have been a dangerous situation into a controlled one." Mia didn't say much after that, but I knew she was processing it in her own way. For her, it was another day on the job. But for me, it was a stark reminder of just how important it is to stay calm under pressure, and how essential it is to understand the power dynamics in any situation. This incident was a learning experience for everyone involved. The security guard learned that power and authority should never be abused, especially when dealing with civilians who might not fit into the mold of what they expect. The supervisor learned that quick judgments and misunderstandings can lead to dangerous consequences, and the importance of handling complaints properly within a community setting. And Mia learned that even though she was trained to handle life and death situations, there will always be new challenges that require a careful balance of strength and control. Moral of the story: never underestimate the power of remaining calm and collected, even when faced with a dangerous situation. Knowing how to handle high-stress scenarios, whether with confidence, skill, or knowledge of your rights, can make all the difference in turning a potentially disastrous moment into a manageable one. This story is a reminder that our ability to remain in control, no matter the situation, is what truly defines our strength.